My name is Robert Hampshire. I'm the executive director for the Research Development Office at the University of Minnesota, and I have no relevant disclosures to make. So, very excited about our last session on evolving research ethics to manage cutting edge technologies. How should ethics evolve to address challenges from AI to xenotransplants to biowar? We're delighted to have two preeminent experts, Professor Brendan Parent, and as well as Afimi Parasides, with us today to consider really the substance of research ethics and how they should evolve to consider these revolutionary technologies, like particularly xenotransplantation, artificial intelligence, and human advancement, particularly in armed conflicts. So each speaker will have 20 minutes, and then we'll turn to our audience for questions. So again, you can post your questions in the Q&A function here of Zoom, and also upvote, those questions using the thumbs up icon. And so for our first speaker, Professor Perrant is the Director of Medical Ethics, Director of the Transplant Ethics and Policy Group, and also associate professor at the Department of Public Health and the Department of Surgery at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine. His research really focuses on organ donation, procurement, transplantation ethics. Also, his research certainly engages, you'll see that here very clearly, ethical issues, things about how human psychology should inform decisions regarding human genetic engineering and policy, particularly in gender affirming care, as well as the regulation of artificial intelligence in healthcare. So it covers a wide range. And also he discloses grant and research support from United Therapeutics, and also serves as an advisor to Bjorg company. So with that, I welcome you for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hampshire. It's truly, truly such an honor to be here. This is like a knock it out of the park lineup. I'm deeply honored. So made it to the last panel of the day. And for those of you who have been throughout, this is really, such an extraordinary opportunity to learn so much. There have been so many concrete suggestions for how to make progress in the research ethics landscape. Today, I plan to go a mile wide and an inch deep on some interesting philosophical questions about how research ethics might or might not evolve as new kinds of technology and science and medicine are pursued. Here are a list of things, none of which I feel particularly conflict me with how I talk to you, but I think you should be the better judge of that. And I'm happy to discuss any of these more at a later time. And I want to start at the million-foot view, which is the foundational concept of research ethics, which is that living human individuals, as research participants, have rights that supersede the pursuit of knowledge and the advancement of either science or clinical medicine. And to protect those rights, we have codified certain principles of research ethics, of which I'd like to highlight three. And this is by no means a comprehensive list, but I think it's an informative list: clinical equipoise, informed consent, and the right to withdraw, which have been touched on in various ways throughout the day today. And I want to think about how these principles that bear certain rights and duties maybe change or don't change, should change or should not change in light of certain new research endeavors. And I'm going to talk about research involving the physiologically maintained deceased, xenotransplant, and artificial intelligence integrated into healthcare for purposes of clinical efficiency. So again, mile wide, inch deep, here we go. Let's start with research involving the physiologically maintained deceased, which is research on human bodies that have been declared dead by neurologic criteria. So why would we engage in this kind of research? Well, clinical medicine eventually involves testing unproven interventions on living humans and hoping that this causes more good than harm. how do we get to a place where we feel confident that testing unproven interventions in living humans will be beneficial? We need to collect preclinical data, and traditionally that comes from non-human animal models, and we all know the limitations of translatability from non-human animal models. We're getting to a point where we might be able to test in the cloud, digital twinning, in silico modeling, but we're not quite there yet. So ostensibly, the best data comes from humans that is applicable to humans. And so we can and have for decades now done some amount of research on human bodies that are mechanically maintained on ventilator or modified bypass or ECMO. And in these bodies, there has been a declaration of death by neurologic criteria, which is legally factual. And this provides a human environment that can be maintained hemodynamically stable to test things like genetically edited pig kidney for xenotransplant purposes, gene therapy, nanotechnology, new devices for purposes of medical education. And arguably, this alleviates risks of using non-human animals as well as living human models. And potentially can bring comfort to families and honor the values of the deceased who may have wanted to be organ donors but are ineligible for organ donation. Now, these considerations all rest on accepting death by neurologic criteria as death in fact. And there remain significant questions and individuals and communities who disagree with death by neurologic criteria as death in fact. And we are learning new things all the time about the resilience of the brain. In fact, the standards for declaring death by neurologic criteria were recently updated by the American Academy of Neurology. But what I'm going to talk about today largely rests on the presumption that there is a form of death by neurologic criteria that is ethically and legally sound. But that also means we need to get informed consent for research involving these bodies. But is it informed consent or is it authorization? Traditionally, informed consent is language that is reserved for either medicine or research involving living humans. And post-mortem interventions like organ donation or body donation, we use the language of authorization. Now, why is that? What is the actual meaningful difference there? Well, one element of it is that the rights of the living arguably supersede the rights of the dead, that there is more at stake, and we need to do a better job of ensuring that an individual has information to be able to make decisions that align with their values. But we also live in a gift law system for donation after death, where arguably the individual has the right to decide the course of the disposition of their body after they die, arguably in accordance with their values and their goals. So we do have some rights, or maybe legacy rights, that persist after we die. So how do we weigh these rights? Can we actually get full information to make informed choices, meaning weighing our autonomous donor decision against the need for bodies and parts? And for all the different kinds of things that can happen to our bodies after we die, whether for medical education or to be maintained on a ventilator to test a pig kidney, or to be donated for a museum display, or cadaver research, to be able to actually get all that information and make fully comprehensive decisions about each of these practices would take more time than an entire high school biology curriculum, right? So how do we weigh this autonomous donor decision against the need for bodies and parts to advance medicine, science, and research when, here's a contentious position, maybe we don't need our bodies after we die, right? But I'll also be the first one to say that, and I'd get very upset if you told me that you were going to string my body up in a warehouse and test the penetration capacity of various ballistics for the military. So I do have some rights to my body. So I think we have to provide morally relevant information and weigh the risks of under-disclosure, meaning we didn't tell a family member everything, then a body was used that completely contravenes their values or the values of the deceased, and then they've lost trust in the whole enterprise, and that lost trust may also bleed over to other enterprises like organ donation. Versus over disclosure, we tell you too much and you're like grossed out and you don't want to do it either. So I think maybe it might be time, again, in the age of AI, that we could provide more dynamic, specific first-person consent via some sort of application to really actually have a little bit more information, have opportunity to ask questions and dictate what happens to our bodies, because this might be the most powerful gift that any of us ever give to advance science and medicine. What about the right to withdraw? The deceased can't speak up and withdraw themselves from research, but can family withdraw their deceased loved one from a trial? Again, this is about the right to self-determination as represented by family members versus some logistical challenges. For example, it might be very difficult to take the body off of a ventilator or remove the pig kidney or take the gene therapy that's already been delivered to various tissues in the body out of the body. Even though you might not be able to undo those modifications, can the family demand, you know what? I can't stand the fact that I know my loved one's heart is beating and they're respirating in some room. I just want to be done, lay their body to rest and be done with it. Is there a right to control the body? Bodies are not property, but maybe there's some sort of familial responsibility akin to assent for a research participant who cannot consent, as we were talking about in the previous session. Do families have some sort of duty to the bodies of their loved ones, again, to represent those wishes, but also they have their own interests? We also have to think about the consequences of not giving the family a right to withdraw their loved one from research for trust, again, in the enterprise and the availability of these precious resources. Clinical equipoise, as a brief sort of refresher, is this notion that we can test an unproven intervention only because we are uncertain as to whether it will be better or worse than existing standard of care. And if there is no standard of care, against a placebo. So we have this potential, this gradient between being in equipoise balance, meaning we really don't know whether a new intervention will be any better or any worse than existing standard of care. And then on the other dichotomous side, we have clearly out of equipoise, meaning we are very certain what treatment will be superior, but it's not a dichotomy. There's a whole middle ground where we're not sure longitudinally if one treatment will be significantly superior than the other, or if it will work better for certain populations, or if there are certain side effects that might be more significant. So we can't start living human research if we're clearly out of equipoise. But is equipoise even relevant for brain dead research entities? Remember, this is all based on the living human participants' rights. But as I was just discussing, there are some kind of rights that the dead have, whether it's because it's the house of the former soul, or because maybe there's just something valuable about how we treat the human body. And without duties to living patients, can we push the envelope a little bit more? Even if what we might, the medical community, agree when equipoise is lost, there is something about pushing the envelope to get more longitudinal data. For example, with a xenotransplant kidney, we might be able to demonstrate that a few weeks with this organ produces urine and doesn't experience rejection episodes. But what about later periods of rejection into 3 months, 6 months, et cetera? Can we keep the body hooked up to test and learn this information, even if more traditional notions of equipoise are lost? Let's run over to xenotransplant for a moment, which is the transplant of non-human tissue or organs into a human body for purposes of life enhancement or life really treatment. And there's been a long history, hundreds of years of attempting xenotransplant because of the organ shortage, not having nearly enough organs for all the people who need them, and failure after failure after failure after failure until literally the last 5 or 6 years. Because of gene editing technology, it has made it possible to modify pigs and pig organs to be more compatible with the human body by knocking out genes that encode for proteins that were lost in the evolutionary chain. And to date, we have done a number of these in physiologically maintained deceased bodies, a number of them via expanded access compassionate use pathways. And just recently, we started a clinical trial of 8 genetically edited xeno pig kidneys in human patients. So this has started enrollment. So informed consent for xenotransplant, what should this look like in the clinical research context? Well, first, we have to be very thoughtful about the therapeutic misconception and the possibility that patients might be enrolling in this trial with the hope for personal benefit and not prioritizing the attainment of knowledge for future generations. Well, is that an unreasonable request for anybody who is in such a vulnerable position because they have been ruled out for life-saving transplant and are told that their only option is palliative care and hopefully having a comfortable death? Is it unreasonable for individuals in this position of vulnerability to have some hope for personal benefit versus being a martyr to gain future, to help, contribute future knowledge? Uh, and I would argue it's not black and white, but the balance can be better maintained with good patient advocacy, someone who's not affiliated with the xenotransplant research enterprise to really help the patient make a decision that aligns with their goals, and making sure that they know that this is not the only treatment option, and being careful around the language saying, look, you have no other options for treatment. It's either this or nothing. That's not true. We can provide you with a comfortable death when maybe that might not be possible or guaranteeable if you were to engage in the research. Other questions. We consent the individual to participate in research, but in this kind of research, there may be certain risks to other individuals via xenozoonotic viral transmission possibility. So do we have to consent contacts because they may be subject to certain risks? And is it just the loved ones that we have to consent? What about healthcare providers or the mailman? Or how many degrees of concentric circles do we go out and require consent? And what kind of information? I just painted this picture about xenozoonotic viral transmission. It's a non-zero risk, but not incredibly probable because we're doing all kinds of screening. But there are so many things we don't even need, or we don't even know what we're screening for. The possibility of various viruses that are endemic to the pig body, but not to the human body. So how do we know what to consent for if we don't even know what we're looking for? And final thing about consent I'll just mention is, what about consenting non-human participants, right? For many, many years, non-human pig parts were put into baboons to test sort of preclinical data, to collect preclinical data. And if this were to become reality, the organ source itself comes from, and will it forever come from, cognitively complex, morally sophisticated entities, pigs. And I want to paint one example. One of the probably more near-term research endeavors in xenotransplant will be providing pediatric heart transplants, because for very small children, it's very hard to find the right size and biological match heart. And so this could potentially be a bridge therapy. And this is a case where the recipient may have less capacity to consent in some ways and needs a representative for their interests, a family or a guardian member, than the organ donor source, right? That the pig actually has a complex range of emotions and experiences and capacity, but has no say. Right to withdraw. Can you withdraw after receiving a xenotransplant? Well, there are the logistical challenges about the fact that we can't take the organ out of your body without ending your life. But what about the idea that we need to follow up with you for the rest of your life because we have to protect public health from this non-zero risk of viral transmission? Is this what some call a Ulysses contract, that you are committed to something regardless of whether you want to or not, for the sake of the public's benefit and protection? Now, hopefully we can avoid any challenges of someone wanting to withdraw or disappear off the radar after we give them a genetically edited pig kidney by careful selection up front and making sure that individuals feel supported and will be compliant with the expectations ahead of time, because this is going to be a hard thing to enforce. We want to protect the right to technically withdraw from research, but we also have to protect the general public. And equipoise, this is a tough one because xenotransplant versus allotransplant, we are technically out of equipoise. Why? Because we know that human allotransplant works. So how can we even justify trying to put genetically edited pig parts in living human beings? Well, we don't have nearly enough organs for all the people who need one. So it's, again, a public interest argument that maybe some people can potentially waive their right to optimal treatment for the sake of creating a new organ source. But beyond that, we may not just be comparing xenotransplant to allotransplant. In the case of kidney, you can stay alive with failing kidneys via dialysis. So the equipoise here is about quality of life on dialysis versus the possibility of higher quality of life with xenotransplant for those patients who may not be eligible or will never have access to a well-matched allo transplant. So our notion of clinical equipoise may have to shift as we engage in this research. And finally, I want to talk briefly just about efficiency AI in healthcare, which is ambient AI listening to your conversation with your doctor and then writing down your chart note and maybe even potentially coming up with treatment recommendations, or chatbots who maybe pose as your doctor when you write in and say, I have a rash or have shortness of breath, and then they give you recommendations for whether to go to the emergency room or how to treat it. So do we require informed consent for the use of AI in these roles? And part of the answer might be based on whether this is truly clinical research versus quality improvement efforts. Now, how do we make that determination? Well, one has to do with scope and generalizability. Another is this within the standard of care, meaning we're doing something slightly different, but not that different? And the answer to that has implications for the level of risk that the individual is incurring as a result of this intervention. I put intervention in air quotes really to ask the question, is this an intervention or a tool to facilitate interventions? And if the benefits are sufficiently high and the risks are sufficiently low, and this is in the local context and it's the standard of care, well, maybe that minimizes the patient's right to know because this is not morally relevant to the course of their care. It's just a tool. But I would argue that maybe we don't know the benefits or the risks, and maybe this shouldn't be local because we don't know how these kinds of AI integration will affect things like medical error or patient satisfaction or clinician burnout. And talk about the right to withdraw. Can you imagine you get a meeting or a doctor's appointment with your orthopedist after 8 months of waiting? You get in there, the doctor walks in and says, hi, do you mind if I use a program to take notes? And you say no. Do you think that doctor is going to say, okay, fine, I'll take my own note? Or can you actually beg the chatbot to turn into a real human? The answer is no, you're going to have to leave that clinic, make another appointment at a different place that's not piloting these interventions, and wait another 8 months. So this isn't really a realistic choice, I don't think, right now, but maybe it should be. So do we have clinical equipoise here? Well, we know human-driven notes and chats work. Are we out of equipoise? I would argue that we need to reframe what equipoise means in this case. For example, accepted level of error in clinical practice, that maybe AI-driven notes can shift one way or the other. But even if we can see an overall improvement, we need to be aware of the possibility that general or reduced overall error does not increase or justify changes or problematic increases in certain population-specific error, which has to do with the biases that might be baked in to the algorithms. So there are many different conceptions of equipoise that we might need to consider when it comes to evaluating, and we should do research on this kind of intervention. I'll wrap up here quickly, but just to ask how we think about research ethics obligations. So one moment, sorry. Research ethics principles derive from human rights, but we need to ask what makes someone human, right? We have living humans, deceased humans. How do these rights compare? What about perfused brains outside the body that are then perfused with or charged with electrical activity and blood substitute to test various interventions? But what about being a human is so special, right? Maybe non-human animals may have rights that might even supersede the rights of human deceased bodies. And eventually, we might have to consider the rights of general artificial intelligence. And there's a lot of debate about whether this will actually be achieved. But how will we know if it has been achieved? And should we hedge our bets and say, well, if there's a possibility that there is some sort of sentient being involved in clinical research, we may need to create protections. We need to have mechanisms to define new competing human rights, codify and respect rights of new unique research subjects, and make sure we have the right entities to do the job. So maybe we need to train and prepare existing entities, again, like from last session, combine them, or maybe even create new entities to protect the rights of new kinds of research participants. Thank you.
Wow, Brendan, amazing set of mind-blowing topics, actually. There's some great questions that we'll get to later, but I want to thank you and introduce again our next speaker for his 20-minute presentation as well, Professor Parasides. He holds the Carriage Trot Endowed Professorship in Law at the Ohio State University, and also as a joint appointment in the College of Public Health and a faculty affiliate, certainly in the Medical School Center for Bioethics. His most recent book, you might have seen and read already, but America's Military Biomedical Complex, Law, Ethics, and the Drive for Scientific Innovation. He's certainly been appointed to many committees of note, particularly at the NIH, related to ethics, but also a member of the team at DARPA on ethics, legal, and social issues. And so I really look forward to his talk here today. He has no relevant disclosures. So with that, the floor is yours, Professor Parasides.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hampshire, for the introduction. And also, I'd like to thank Professor Susan Wolf and all her colleagues at the University of Minnesota for inviting me to this conference. It takes an incredible amount of work to put on a conference of this magnitude, and it's an honor to be a part of it and to be able to share my work here on research ethics in military science, and in particular on military human enhancements in biowarfare. Next slide. So this presentation builds off my recent book, and actually you could probably just scroll through and there are a couple of things here. You can put them all up there. It might be just easier. One more after that. That's it. So I'm going to start with an overview on topics I'll discuss today. In order to place cutting-edge military human enhancements and bioweapons into context, it's important to understand the broader historical development of research ethics in military science. So from the founding of the American Republic up to the early 1900s, the work focused on efforts to maintain a healthy fighting force. This included the provision of medical care, preventive health measures, and medical research. But a significant shift took place in the early 20th century, and specifically the utilization of gas warfare during World War I, which motivated a shift in military science, whereby physicians and researchers expanded their work beyond healthcare to encompass weapons development. So this included weapons development in chemical warfare, biological warfare. The shift continued after World War I, accelerated during World War II, and throughout the Cold War. And really during this era, military science grew exponentially, both throughout military and civilian institutions. Now, much more recently, especially over the past quarter century, military science has expanded to encompass not only research to protect the fighting force, but also research to enhance it. And this includes human enhancements such as pharmaceuticals and brain-to-computer interfaces that augment human cognition and physiology. And it also includes biosecurity research into novel bioweapons and how to defend against them. So that'll be the first half. In the second half of my talk, I'll turn to a discussion of legal and regulatory levers that apply to military science research. And these include federal protections, FDA guidelines, and military-specific policies. And I'll then conclude with some suggestions on how to recalibrate the legal framework, and also offer some proposals for incorporating more ethics reviews into military science. Okay, next slide, please. So again, the historical overview begins with the birth of the American nation General George Washington and other leaders of the Continental Army recognized that good health was essential to the success of the revolutionaries. Disease was the leading cause of death during the war, responsible for 9 in 10 wartime casualties. Smallpox outbreaks were particularly devastating. They even brought the Continental Army to the brink of a mutiny. So, a key turning point during this war was Washington's order that mandated smallpox variolation. So, variolation is a procedure that attempts to build immunity by exposing a person to a mild form of the smallpox virus, typically by placing diseased tissue into an open wound on their body. So, the first image there on the left is actually taken from a smallpox variolation manual, which depicts the tools that were used during the procedure and how the wound would actually proceed to first expand and then heal over time. So Washington's mandate was very controversial. Many individuals, or actually all individuals, who were undergoing the procedure were contagious. They had to be quarantined. Some died or suffered serious disabilities, such as blindness, during the procedure. During the war, many service members protested the mandate, claiming that it violated their individual freedom, was based on uncertain clinical grounds, was an affront to God's right to determine the circumstances under which a person was to die, while others were eager to undergo the procedure, right? Hopes of warding off the devastating effects of the disease. The rationales are not unlike many of the discussions we have today regarding vaccine mandates, which I just think is one interesting point. So in the end, Washington persisted. The mandate was widely enforced, and variolation-induced smallpox immunity was one of the key factors that helped the revolutionaries to victory. At the same time, though, the mandate underscored the ethical question that arises in a combat situation when a military commander compels a subordinate to submit to a medical treatment that they otherwise might refuse. So, in the century that followed the Revolutionary War, the medical profession was generally widely criticized. Physicians really didn't have a good sense of how to treat diseases effectively. Medical interventions were rarely successful. Throughout the 19th century, medical schools had lax educational standards. Apothecaries sold quack medicines with wild curative claims. And really, this inability to treat disease effectively led people to kind of avoid physicians and avoid medical care more generally. And it also encouraged them to avoid preventative health measures as well. So the middle image there is one of a line of medical wagons taken from the Civil War. And the one on the right is actually a medical camp from the Spanish-American War. Okay, so mistrust of these health professionals was not merely a wartime concern. The real shift happened in the late 1800s and the early 1900s when the field of medicine underwent a major transformation with the advent of the germ theory of the disease and the understanding that various causal agents, viruses, bacteria, etc., were actually the causes of conditions. And that's when we see a scientific revolution follow. Medical researchers started to be heralded as cutting-edge professionals. Medical schools tightened their entry requirements, and physicians really were revered across the country. Now, at this time, the military was at the forefront of both medical and scientific research. It established dozens of medical boards across the country. Medical schools founded by the Army and Navy were of the first in the nation to expand their programs to conduct medical research. And by the beginning of World War I, the US had a comprehensive military healthcare system. The fighting force was healthier than ever. Okay, next slide, please. The shift here again was during World War I with the use of gas warfare. So again, for about 140 years, right, the military medical establishment was focused on medical research, preventative health measures. The shift after World War I was that the advent of gas warfare catapulted military physicians and research into developing chemical weapons and ideas for defending against them. So the image on the top left is an actual gas attack from that was conducted near Belgium. So the early attacks involved the use of thousands of large canisters that were filled with chlorine gas. They were placed along a line. When the winds were blowing in the proper direction, they were all opened, and that's how the gas was like inundating the enemy. The lower left is an image of U.S. Army service members with kind of the latest gas masks that were available at that time. So what we saw during World War I was the military put a huge call out to universities, out to research institutes, out to medical establishment in general to get physicians to help construct not only the defenses to chemical warfare, but also how to construct new and more lethal chemical weapons themselves. And during this work, warfighters were oftentimes compelled into very risky chemical warfare studies. Now, all of this deployment, all of this work occurred despite international treaties that were signed by, dozens of nations where they pledged to abstain from gas weapons. Even Germany, the first nation to institute a gas attack, defended its actions, called its warfare and use of chemical weapons as a mild method of war. And after that first German offensive, we saw military leaders in Britain, France, the United States dive deep into chemical weapons, drawing on academic and industrial elite within their nations to further their own chemical weapons efforts. And within a very short period of time, all of the major powers in the war were using chemical weapons pretty extensively. So in the decades that followed, after World War I and building up into World War II, there were still more international treaties that tried to instill this global norm against the proliferation of chemical weapons and biological weapons. But what those treaties actually ended up doing was driving a lot of the work underground. So the military felt that national security was the driving force. The need to have the ability to use these types of weapons and to defend against them trumped any sort of instances to try to keep in line with these international treaties. Now, at this point, we see universities dedicating a lot of their faculty, a lot of their laboratories into atomic weapons research, chemical weapons research, biological weapons research, and the ethical implications of research with human subjects, whether it was military personnel, conscientious objectors, prisoners, children in orphanages, individuals housed in mental institutions, all of that received very little attention. And the breadth of this work is actually stunning. Prisoners were offered favorable treatment, early release for participating in medical research regarding antimalarial treatments and other therapies. Service members were asked to stand in fields alongside monkeys and other animals as low-flying planes would inundate them with chemical weapons. Others were ordered into gas chambers and inundated with mustard gas or other substances in order to test protective clothing. Many of these studies, the results were actually published in leading medical journals, but still there was very little pushback from the entire medical establishment. Now, as you might imagine, countless participants who participated in this research suffered research-related harms, including blindness, intense vomiting, internal and external bleeding, damage to their respiratory system, and much more. Many suffered long-term effects such as cancer, asthma, and psychological disorders. And many veterans even maintained the secrecy of these studies because they were told if they disclosed their participation, they would be prosecuted under the Espionage Act. A lot of this didn't come to the public knowledge until into the mid-1990s. Even more shocking was during the Nuremberg trials that followed World War II, where German physicians who engaged in gruesome concentration camp experiments ended up getting recruited to the United States to take part in some of America's military studies. Now, during the trials, the Germans even pointed to American military research and prison research to highlight their defense that there weren't any binding legal guidelines regarding how this research should be conducted. Also during the trial, the American Medical Association, which had long protested the codification of ethical principles, finally decided to institute some ethical guidelines for this work. Now, apart from the Germans who were recruited into the American research establishment after World War II, the US also granted Japanese researchers immunity from war crimes prosecution in exchange for them sharing their biowarfare secrets. And a lot of their work, which were horrific experiments that were conducted on Chinese nationals and other war prisoners, including American prisoners of war. Some of this work included injecting humans with bacteria and viruses and studying how the progress would happen over time. Now, at the time, very few American leaders questioned the wisdom of this work, whether the wisdom of employing Nazi scientists, Japanese biowarfare experts, and in the end, national security was the key driver that propelled a lot of their decisions. So the images that you have in the middle there, the one in the top middle are actually US service members being ordered into a gas chamber. This is in America. The middle, bottom middle is some prison research that was being conducted. The top right is an airplane spraying chemical weapons over U.S. service members during a training exercise. And the bottom right is probably familiar to most. It's an atomic weapon test blast that was conducted in Nevada. Okay, next slide, please. The change in research protections that we saw really came after the mid 1970s, when we saw a series of exposés about the military research and also, of course, the Tuskegee syphilis study. The public was alarmed. Congress establishes a national commission to assess research protections. The Belmont Report offers an ethical framework, and new laws and regulations followed. Of course, I could spend a lot more time talking about that longer history, but at this point, I want to shift into much more recent work, thinking about cutting edge research in military enhancements and biosecurity. So by the early 21st century, we have this biomedical complex. It's billions of dollars each year that's being put into medical research, into scientific research, and one aspect of this work includes human enhancements and biosecurity. Now, along with this, what we see is, as the military candidly states, one of its primary goals is to exploit the life sciences to create warfighters with superior physical, physiological, and cognitive abilities. As many would say, the demand for super soldiers has never been greater. So these projects include pharmaceuticals and medical devices that can enhance and augment learning, memory, and warfighter performance. And a large part is thinking about how neuroscience can be integrated into military operations. So some examples include drugs that can increase endurance, neurostimulation devices, some of which are worn like a cap over your head, others which are much more invasive, involve deep brain stimulation. And the goal here is to, again, enhance warfighter performance. And some of it actually looks to have warfighters be able to control weapons via thought alone. So there have been a couple of reports I want to highlight. One was a 2019 report from the Department of Defense that outlined certain types of enhancements that the Department of Defense believed were going to be technically feasible within the next 3 decades. And these include ocular enhancements to enhance imaging, sight, situational awareness, muscular control through increased optogenetic bodysuits, auditory enhancements, and direct neural enhancements, again, for what we call two-way data transfer. So again, this is literally thinking about something and being able to control something with your thoughts alone. Now, just like we saw with the early or mid-century work in the 1900s, where proponents in the chemical and biological industries were supporting this research, in the 21st century, what we see are tech companies and novel biotechnology companies supporting the human enhancement research, again, for military endeavors. Even the DoD Council that I mentioned before called for what they call, quote, a whole of nation approach to human machine enhancement technologies. And the reason for that was to integrate, again, the knowledge and know-how of faculty and universities in order to outpace rivals, one of which was specifically named was China in that report. Now, those findings were also underscored a couple of years later in a 2022 NATO report that was called Neuroenhancement in Military Personnel, which again underscored the urgent need for new technologies with respect to enhancements. So one program that DARPA has been working on and that I was an ethics advisor for was called Measuring Biological Aptitude. Now, anything I'm going to discuss here, of course, is only in the public domain. So the goal of that program was to improve individual performance by obtaining a microphysiological details of individuals during their training and during their operations. And the idea here is to measure how people are performing in real time, maybe stimulate them based on what that information is showing, or assign them to certain tasks that would be more of a genetic fit or epigenetic fit, depending on their biological makeup. Now, along with this, building on the previous Brendan's previous presentation, is thinking about how gene editing techniques tie into this kind of biological monitoring. In other words, it's one thing to monitor how someone is progressing. It's another to think about gene editing techniques that will actually enhance a person's ability to function in a certain way. And there was a National Academies report from a couple of years ago that was looking at heritable genome editing. And one of the conclusions was that gene editing trials, research trials, shouldn't be prohibited, but they should be proceed with caution. So again, this is something that's just ties in deeply with this type of military research. Now, one last thing in this realm is thinking about biosecurity. Now, of course, throughout the coronavirus virus pandemic, the intelligence community was at the forefront of trying to analyze, the origin of the pandemic and the biowarfare implications. Now, regardless of whether the lab leak theory is true, there's no serious doubt that labs across the world are studying bioengineered pathogens, and there remains substantial concern about how these pathogens might interact should they get leaked out into the community. Okay, next slide, please. So, what are the legal and ethical guardrails here? So here you could probably scroll through there. One, two, three more. That's it. So here we have, in terms of federal research protections, the common rule FDA guidelines apply to any research involving military technologies. At the same time, at least with respect to the FDA, there are expedited review processes that are used primarily in military contexts, one of which is called the animal rule, which allows for approval of military countermeasures where conducting studies on humans would be unethical. So this includes things like countermeasures for biological or chemical warfare, where the study would essentially require exposing a person to that chemical or biological agent. And although that work took place in the mid 1900s, after the common rule and in light of the FDA guidelines that kind of took place later part of that century, that work is now typically not approved by IRBs. So,
Professor Parasides, let's if you go ahead and just kind of as you wrap, we can kind of move to questions.
sure, happy to. So very quickly then, there are also military-specific policies that come into place that supplement the federal laws and actually afford protections that go beyond those listed in civilian requirements. In terms of governmental immunities, again, I just briefly mentioned that these essentially make it more difficult for individuals harmed in this work to actually pursue any type of recourse. So we can move to the last slide. You could just scroll through this one too. So again, what is to be done? One idea that I'm happy to dive deeper into the Q&A, it's also mentioned more in the book, is thinking more about how to strengthen the safeguards for research that's conducted in this area. And even when products are approved through expedited pathways, to give medical service members a little bit more autonomy in thinking about when those types of medications and countermeasures should be required. In terms of governmental immunities, what I argue for is making it harder for the government to essentially use those as shields to protect from negligent conduct. And in terms of expanding ethics reviews, I call for having a more detailed military science ethics review board that accounts for research studies that fall outside the common rule and also look for more of a lifestyle approach to ethical considerations, particularly when it comes to human enhancement. So I'll stop there in light of the time and I look forward to the questions.
All right. Well, thank you for that riveting set of presentations. And Brendan, we'll bring you on here for a Q&A. I think we'll jump into the questions, but as this session is really called Evolving Research Ethics to Manage Cutting Edge Technologies, I want to push us think about those evolving changes that are needed. So this question is to both of you all. As we think about federal policy, particularly being so static, in these developments moving very quickly. Both of you all talked about developments that are happening here very quickly. How can we cope? Like, what are structures or things we need to put in place to keep up with these respective areas? And maybe Brendan, I'll start with you.
Look, I don't know. I guess institutions have to be more nimble, right? I mean, we need structures and expectations where the research is taking place. I mean, ask some more amount of uh, self-regulation. There's the possibility of independent IRB oversight. I don't have a good answer for what can step in light of a challenging federal political environment that is not paying enough attention.
Yeah, and yeah, I guess in the bio case, the history, those are frightening examples, I think, from the federal standpoint, but also international. There's a set of questions in the Q&A around how can international regimes also keep track, or what should be taken into account for local norms and culture. Femi, I'll put that to you.
Sure. So it also ties in, I think, with the first question. So my sense is that federal law should be the floor, right? So when we think of the federal guidelines, whether it's the Common Rule or FDA regulations, that's the bare minimum that researchers should be thinking when it comes to, is it ethical to perform the studies or the work that they're performing? And I actually think the military is at the forefront of this. I mean, they have military specific policies that go beyond that's legally required. And I think that that's something to underscore, and it's something that civilian research institutions, whether it's universities or other institutions, hospitals, for example, can take that as a guide, rely more on their ethics review boards and IRBs, not just for compliance, but for looking beyond kind of like the checkbox legal requirements. Now, on the in the military side, I mean, if history tells us anything, it's that countries are going to do whatever they think is necessary to promote their national security, even if it means conducting research that many people would find to be abhorrent or unethical. I'm not sure that any international treaty is going to stop that, to be perfectly honest. I think, again, it comes down to the institutions doing the work and the individuals doing the work to put up those ethical guardrails.
And I'm sorry, I also just mentioned, in terms of research innovation using human bodies and body parts as source of treatment, there have been some good case studies, some good examples where the researchers recognize that the ability to do the work depends on the buy-in from the community, because the community is the source of the treatment, the source of the research, right? And so they have created new regulatory or oversight structures when the IRB isn't technically required, because technically IRB and common rule only applies to living human subjects. So they say, look, we need new entities. We want to show that we are actually caring about the ethical considerations and preserving trust. So I think there's some hope.
Yeah, and let me just add on to that, Brendan, because there's also a set of questions around, non-human participants, to other, but other AI, in that as well. So, Brendan, when you think about, you mentioned consenting for non-human participants, and it was xenotransplants really, and what the demand could look like there. Could you say something more about that? I think there were a lot of questions in the chat about that.
Uh, yeah, so, if we have to be cognizant of what the goals are, one, and if our goal is to alleviate the organ shortage, what is sort of the ethically optimal, not just clinically optimal path to that end? And if it means creating a whole new animal agriculture industry, there are all kinds of implications, including the actual space and resources required to do this, the potential environmental impact. If eventually there's a pig waiting in the wings for Robert, Femi, and Brendan, and that means that we have now sort of upscaled, and how does that affect how we treat each individual animal if we're now having to maintain millions of these animals? How does that also modulate the potential risk for xenozoonotic viral transmission? And also, again, pigs, are morally sophisticated entities, and people say, wait a minute, what about the animal agriculture industry? This is to save lives, right? Why is this a big deal? And the answer is, well, maybe instead of pointing to the animal agriculture industry and meat to justify this practice, maybe we look at this practice to question the animal agriculture industry.
Yeah. And this will be, I think, probably the last questions to both of you all. So there's certainly a lot of questions around AI. So let me put this in the context of both of your talks, and in context around implantable AI devices and human machine symbiosis, right? And so, when we think about evolving research ethical concepts, or even regulatory regimes, like how do you think about that, Femi or Brendan? Like if you say instead of a pig, maybe you have an AI device that keeps someone alive during this testing, or even in bio warfare and the warfighter, this has been a topic that's ongoing. So Femi, maybe I'll start with you on that, and then go to Brendan.
I mean, honestly, the thought of an implantable AI device in a service mentor sounds terrifying to me. Um, I guess even when it comes to implantable non-AI devices, things like deep brain stimulation, um, that though just doing the work, implanting the electrode is incredibly risky, with lots of unknown side effects. And I think, I mean, maybe I'm a little bit of an AI skeptic, but I think we're just so early in the AI mindset to be able to say that there's a device that can augment, a warfighter's ability to fight or think faster is, I think, is just a little far-fetched, even though it might be something that people are thinking about and looking ahead to.
Interesting. Brendan, do you want to contemplate that as well?
I mean, I agree. I think we got to think about all these questions in context of what's the goal? What are we trying to do here? Promote human flourishing, and does this get us there, right? And maybe the answer is no, and it's okay if the answer is no.
Okay. Well, I would just really want to thank both of you all. You just really scraped the surface. I know that each of these topics, I know I was terrified in preparing for this session and reading about some of the possibilities, but also, there's some threads there that could, you mentioned human flourishing. And so I just want to thank you all for sharing your expertise. And with this, we'll turn it back to our host here, Professor Wolf.
Well, I want to thank all of our speakers and moderators, and very much thank our audience for fantastic questions, fantastic comments. Actually, one of my favorite posted comments was just the word wow. And I want to echo that because we were here today at an incredibly challenging time. And I think our speakers, our moderators, and you, our audience, have done an amazing job in really exploring why is this a challenging time? What are the threats? But also, what are the opportunities? How do we move forward? Um, we are going to post the recording for this entire webinar right away. And really use it, share it, use it in teaching, meetings, send a link to people. We want it to be maximally helpful. Later this afternoon, everybody who's registered will get an email from us asking you for your feedback. And we do read every one. So please just take a few moments. Tell us what you thought. We'd love that. I want to remind those of you who signed up for continuing ed credits that you really have got to respond to the email that you're going to get next Tuesday from the University of Minnesota's Office of Continuing Professional Development to fill out that separate evaluation. That's essential to your getting the credits that you want. And I do need to note that watching the video after, unfortunately, does not count towards CE credit. Only those who attended synchronously are eligible. And with that, enormous thanks again to everybody who enabled this conference today, our staff, our video team, everybody. And we look forward to continuing to work with you, our speakers, our audience, to advance research ethics. Thank you.